Thank you for joining child welfare and housing agency partnerships using federal housing vouchers to support youth. I'm Andrew Johnson with the Corporation for Supportive Housing, or CSH, and we're really excited by your interest in this important topic. And just wanted to note that we are recording today's session. Everyone has been muted, and you are welcome to use the chat. And I will now turn it to Chris Isom from Casey Family Programs to get us started. Chris?
Good afternoon, everyone. Today's session is brought to you by the Corporation for Supportive Housing and Casey Family Programs. I am Chris Isom, and I'm a National Partnership Advisor with Casey Family Programs. I am based here in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been with Casey since November of 2022, and I have extensive background with both state and private agency collaborations with communities and state foster care. For today's session are Rashonda Lanier Jackson and Andrew Johnson, both with CSH, who will be your moderators. Rashonda Lanier Jackson is a passionate urban planner focused on eliminating disparities and promoting upward mobility for economic communities. Rashonda is currently a senior program manager with CSH, where she works to increase cross-sector investments and housing opportunities throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. Throughout her career, Rashonda has used a people-first approach to help change at a systematic and individual level through roles in local and state government, education, and community development. Rashonda holds a Master's of Urban and Regional Planning from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, among many other things. She's also an adoptive parent and a fierce advocate for supportive housing initiatives to reduce and prevent youth who are homeless and youth homelessness. Andrew, he serves as the Director for Systems Transformation for Families and Youth with CSH's Strategy and External Affairs Department. He is in San Diego, California, and he leads CSH's national multi-sector collaborative strategies to shift public systems towards an integrated and equitable system. He has extensive experience working with the homelessness response and public child welfare systems. Prior to CSH, he served in state government leadership and child welfare and public housing agencies, including oversight of the Family Unification Program housing vouchers for families and youth. Additionally, there are CSH and Casey staff that are supporting today's events and will be engaging with you in the chat in the QA. We also have some speakers that are joining us as part of the panel. Casey Family Programs and CSH are excited to be joined today by two additional panelists. Malik Rivers, he's a project associate with the Center for Capacity Building at the National Alliance to End Homelessness. In his role, he's working on the effectiveness of the center by providing administrative coordination and programmatic support to its core and technical assistance teams. Luther Owens from the New Jersey Department of Children and Family Services and Family Community Partnerships. He is here serving as a supervising administrative analyst with their housing office. And now I'm going to turn it to Rashonda.
Thanks so much, Chris, for introducing our host and moderators for today's webinar. Welcome, everyone. My name is Rashonda Lanier Jackson, and my pronouns are she and her. Today's webinar is focused on federal housing vouchers for young people exiting foster care. Following our time together, you will receive two briefs focused specifically on the vouchers we discussed today with links to additional resources. You'll also receive the recording. We do want you to take care of yourselves during this presentation, so remember to stand up and stretch, but don't go too far because we'll be covering some great information. And so we will review the Family Unification Program and Foster Youth to Independence housing vouchers. We will share national data on current youth homelessness and share insight on the current utilization of these vouchers. We will also identify strategies and opportunities that child welfare and housing leaders can use to begin to enhance their work with these housing resources. And there will be a panel discussion followed by Q&A from audience members. You may submit questions using the Q&A, and we encourage you to engage with each other as well as with CSH and CFP staff in the chat throughout. We are incredibly excited about your interest in the Family Unification Program and Foster Youth to Independence Vouchers. I believe the goal of our collective work is to ultimately create pathways of stability for all young people, especially those exiting from our foster care systems. In our 90 minutes together, this webinar will not cover every possible topic or detail. However, it is our hope that this presentation will introduce or reintroduce these available housing vouchers for youth aging out of foster care. It is our hope that this presentation will be a catalyst for increasing the utilization of FUP and FYI vouchers. It is also our hope that this presentation will provide a space for collective sharing and growth for all who work with and on behalf of youth, especially those experiencing housing instability. And lastly, we hope this webinar will create a community of support around accessing federal housing vouchers for youth exiting foster care, as well as highlight opportunities for local cross-sector partnerships. And with that, I am going to transition back to Chris to share some information about Casey Family Programs.
Thank you, Rashonda. Casey Family Programs is the nation's largest operating foundation focused on safely reducing the needs of foster care and building communities of hope for children and families in the United States. One of Casey's priorities is to help advance our organization. One of Casey's priorities that helps to advance our organizational objectives is to minimize youth's time away from their family. Supportive housing for youth and families bolstered by supportive services is one such way to do that. Casey Family Programs believes that every child deserves a safe, strong, and permanent family. Every family will thrive with the support of a caring community, and every community can create hope and opportunities for children and families. Every one of us has a role to play in building communities of hope. The cornerstone of building communities of hope is our recognition that we must all work together across systems and sectors, government, business, nonprofit, and faith-based, philanthropic, and community members themselves to think, plan, and act in a collaboration to improve the long-term safety, well-being, and hope of children and their families. Ongoing partnership between Casey and CSH, because we know that housing matters to youth and families. For families, a lack of or unstable housing is a contributor to children to be removed, as well as lack of concrete support, such as housing, can be a barrier to youth being able to safely exit care. For youth, stable housing and support is critical to successfully transition out of the foster care system. We hope that this webinar will show child welfare and their housing partners how to partner together to utilize these federal housing vouchers to support young people in their transition for foster care and to help them build strong futures. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew.
Thanks, Chris. The Corporation for Supportive Housing, or CSH, is a national nonprofit working to advance affordable housing aligned with services as an approach to help people really thrive. And we do this by advocating for effective policies, funding, and equitably investing in communities and strengthening the supportive housing field. And since 2016, CSH and our partners have joined together to advance One Roof, which is a national initiative that brings together housing and child welfare partners to build better futures for children, youth, and families. At its core, supportive housing is a type of affordable housing designed for people to have a home in the community of choice and the services they identify to support them in thriving. And supportive housing is typically for people currently experiencing homelessness or those who have had significant experiences of housing instability. And we promote an approach to supportive housing specifically designed to support families that we call Keeping Families Together, and also approaches for young people who are impacted by child welfare involvement and housing and service needs. And jurisdictions all across the country, including New Jersey, who we'll be hearing from today, are leveraging supportive housing approaches as the scaffolding for the delivery of more effective and responsive public services and community supports. I think with that, I will turn back to Rashonda.
Thanks, Andrew. So for the webinar today, we had around 200 people register from across the country, which is incredibly exciting. And we sincerely thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. When you registered, we asked a few questions to gain insight of our audience and levels of understanding on today's topic. Here are the results based on your responses. And so we have quite a bit of folks here covered from across various sectors, and also excited to see the category that says other, recognizing that this great works takes all of us. And so if comfortable, like we said, the chat is open, but we'd love to hear from those of you who selected other, what affiliation or sector you have represented here today. And then on the next slide, we will take a look at how the audience rated their knowledge of Family Unification Program and Foster Youth to Initiative vouchers. Though most indicated having a level of awareness of these resources, we know that there are others who are exploring these opportunities for the first time. There have been numerous changes and much learned over the past 33 years since the Family Unification Program was created, and 4 years since the Foster Youth to Independence Initiative was created in 2019. This presentation is an opportunity to refresh your existing approach or plan for an anticipated FUP or FYI program. As a reminder, this information today from the webinar from our host and panelists is intended to support communities as they consider how to maximize federal housing vouchers as a resource for youth, provide insights from peers and those with lived experience. However, this is not formal guidance directly from HUD. And with that, I will transition to Andrew, who will walk us through some housing and child welfare disparities data.
Yeah, thanks, Rashonda. CSH created a racial disparities and disproportionality index that looks at 16 unique systems to measure whether a racial or ethnic group's representation within a particular public system is proportionate to, over, or below their representation in the overall population. And it allows for an examination of the systemic differences between groups and geographies. And it also helps provide a standardized comparison between groups. And while there are variations across states, there are clear equity gaps that exist for transition age youth at the intersections of child welfare involvement and housing instability, as you can see on the screen. So with that, to kind of continue the theme of data and kind of the why for this work, I'm going to introduce now Malik Rivers, project associate with the Center for Capacity Building at the National Alliance to End Homelessness. Malik.
Thank you for that introduction, Andrew. So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. As we all know, housing is vital for young adults' well-being and stability. Centering their voices, giving their expertise in systems like foster care and homelessness is crucial for shaping effective support services. So before diving into the maps, I'm going to highlight some data from the National Youth in Transition Database surveys. So from 2011 to 2018, there was an 8% increase in the percentage of 17-year-olds surveyed that had experienced homelessness at some point in their lives. In the most recent data, a quarter of youth experienced homelessness. So if you look at cohort 4, 2018, that's the most recent data. In addition to that, around 50% of these youth experienced homelessness, again, at age 19 or 21. So I just want us to sit with those numbers for just a second, because 50% was pretty alarming to me, and it should be alarming to everyone else on this call as well. So I'm going to be presenting 2 maps. They are not live just yet, but they will be in the coming weeks on the NAEH website. There is a link in the chat to the current materials we do have published on the site. So with this map, the first one shows the percentage of eligible PHAs that are accessing FYI vouchers. And the second map is going to show the percentage of youth experiencing homelessness in all 50 states, including DC and Puerto Rico. So what I would like for you all to do is to go ahead and write in the chat your state and what percentage of eligible PHAs you think are accessing FYI vouchers there. And I'm going to go ahead and wait for a few seconds so people can go ahead and write in the chat. And again, I'm looking for the state you're in and what percentage of eligible PHAs you think are accessing FYI vouchers. All right. Okay, seeing some numbers. Okay, cool. So this is the overall map. What we're looking at right now is the overall map. And I've highlighted a few states. So in Georgia, as we can see, there are 10% of eligible PHAs accessing FYI vouchers. In Nebraska, there's about 9%. And then in Oregon, there's about 29%. So, and these numbers, they look similar across the United States. And it's really important that we are encouraging PHAs and child welfare agencies to create partnerships so that these PHAs can start participating, not start participating, but can participate in the non-competitive process, accessing vouchers when needed. And the Alliance will continue working with our field and local partners to really encourage PHAs and child welfare agencies to take action to use these vouchers for youth exiting foster care, as well as for youth who have already become homeless after exiting foster care. So if we move on to the next map, this map shows foster youth age 19 who have been experiencing homelessness over the past 2 years. And as you all can see, there is a high rate of homelessness among transitioning youth in so many states. So if we look at a few more slides, you'll see that there's like blocks of states that are within either like a 20 to 29% range, 30 to 39% range, or 40 to 49% range. And although I'm talking about FYI and these maps are highlighting FYI, there is an underutilized use of vouchers as well. And as of, I believe, August 2023, HUD reported current FUP awards effectively created approximately 31,000 housing vouchers. And of those 31,000, around 500,000 are currently leased. So that's around the 73% utilization rate, which is good, but there's room for improvement, of course. So if your community isn't currently using these vouchers, I highly encourage you to take the first step in bringing all the stakeholders to the table and starting that conversation. And I will now turn it over to Rashonda. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Malik. And so, as you can see, the data shows strong need for housing support for youth transitioning from foster care and an underutilization of vouchers. And so, again, appreciate that, Malik and Andrew, for grounding us in some important data about the need for housing support for youth transitioning from foster care. As an adoptive mom, I understand firsthand the importance of these resources. My oldest son's biological parents were homeless youth who aged out of the foster care system. I truly believe that being stably housed, along with having supportive services, would have changed the course of their lives. I believe it's an injustice for any child to exit our foster care system without a safe, supportive environment. And seeing so many of you on this call gives me great hope that we can and will solve youth homelessness. So we'll now take a look at what federal housing assistance resources currently exist for youth in your community exiting foster care and how this funding can help address the problem. And so starting with the Family Unification Program, which is known as FUP, it was originally authorized in 1990 by Congress to preserve or reunite families with child welfare involvement. And you can go to the next slide. There we go. So FUP provides a non-time limited housing voucher for families whom the lack of adequate housing is a primary factor in the imminent placement of the family's child or children in out-of-home care, or the delay in the discharge from out-of-home care, or of the child or children to the family, which is commonly known as reunification. In 2009, Congress extended FUP eligibility to young people who exited foster care and lack adequate housing. So FUP can now provide up to 36 months of rental assistance for youth ages 18 through 24 years old who have either left foster care at age 16 or older, or will leave foster care within 90 days and is currently homeless or is at risk of experiencing homelessness. So now we'll take a look at Foster Youth to Independence Initiative. And so FYI is a HUD initiative established in 2019 that creates access and funding for additional housing vouchers specifically to young people who have exited foster care and lack adequate housing. The FYI initiative resulted from national advocacy organizations in partnership with young people, and to date have been made available through competitive awards and non-competitive processes. FYI created mechanisms for eligible PHAs, which are public housing authorities, to request vouchers for youth on a rolling basis under certain circumstances. So FYI, like FUP, provides up to 36 months of rental assistance to youth ages 18 through 24 who left foster care at age 16 or older, or will leave foster care within 90 days through the formal child welfare transition plan, and is experiencing homelessness or is at risk of experiencing homelessness. So we will now take a look at the different partnerships and partnership roles. And so I want to be clear that only public housing authorities that administer housing choice vouchers are eligible to apply to HUD for FUP and FYI vouchers. To qualify for FUP and FYI, a public housing authority must have a formal partnership agreement with a public child welfare agency. And this is typically established through a memorandum of understanding or an MOU. Other partners can be included as parties to the MOU, such as a local continuum of care. And I saw that we have some folks here from COCs, and so thank you for being here with us. Each entity has a distinct role, and at times there can be some overlap to ensure youth are receiving the services and support they need. The PHA, as Public Housing Authority, is the applicant for funding. So with each new funding application, there must be a new or updated MOU between the Public Housing Authority and the Public Child Welfare Agency. The agreement should be created jointly and updated at appropriate intervals. The PHA also determines voucher administration, which includes tenant briefing, issuance, unit quality inspection and approval, landlord contracts, payments, and examinations of rent calculations. The PHA also develops FUP FYI goals and standards of success, including the development of data and metrics for tracking improvements. Now, public child welfare agencies play a lead role in estimating the number of needed vouchers for a 12-month period. Successful implementation of the FUP and FYI requires public child welfare agencies to take an active role in coordinating with PHAs to identify eligible youth, referring eligible youth, as well as ensuring supportive services are in place to help young people attain stability. The Public Child Welfare Agency trains the Public Housing Authority and other housing partners on trauma-informed care and best practices for helping youth realize their own personal goals. Again, collaboration with the local COC is key and is encouraged. Some jurisdictions adapt their coordinated access system for homelessness response to prioritize youth. Now, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, so a NOFO, outlines the many and very detailed requirements of what must be specifically addressed in the MOU and provides a sample template as well. Andrew will share more about the NOFO later in our presentation. So let's now take a moment to look at these funding resources side by side. And so again, Congress allocates this funding for FUP and FYI to HUD, who awards the funding to public housing agencies to operate FUP and FYI as a part of the Housing Choice Voucher Program. They do this in partnership with their local public child welfare agency and others, such as the Homeless Response System, Continuum of Care, and other service providers. The FUP and FYI vouchers have to be administered by PHAs in partnership with public child welfare agencies. Can't stress that enough. Both FUP and FYI provide time-limited rental assistance on behalf of a young person for up to 36 months, which may be extended up to an additional 24 months under certain conditions for youth engaged in family self-sufficiency programs or other similar programs. FUP and FYI vouchers are made available periodically through a NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity from HUD. A limited number of FYI vouchers can also be drawn down by local public housing agencies, partnering with child welfare agencies to assist youth on an as-needed rolling basis through a non-competitive process. I will now transition to Andrew to share about some key requirements and optional components of the FUP and FYI vouchers.
Great, thanks, Rashonda. So along with knowing that the rental assistance that's provided through these FUP and FYI housing vouchers being very critical, there's really been a growing recognition that in order to utilize and fully benefit from this assistance, that young people often identify a desire and need for additional services and supports. And we've seen some excellent research, learning from the field, and the voices of youth really inform that, and responses from federally that have really created more opportunities and requirements around supportive services in the Family Unification Program. But you can imagine that searching for housing by itself is a daunting experience generally, let alone for someone that's been in out-of-home care through the child welfare system and is facing or in this transition period, and then having to, often for the first time, search for and find an appropriate place to live quickly. So, as a part of FUP and FYI, the Public Child Welfare Agency role is to help secure the commitments, either for services that can be provided by the Child Welfare Agency, but also services that can be provided by other public and community-based providers. Potentially even the Housing Authority may have services as well. And we really see that ideally when youth are supported holistically from their housing application and search, during and after their foster care transition, through the housing lease up, and then ongoing, really can help them to heal, strengthen, and truly move towards thriving for the long term. And it's important to really take into account responsiveness to young people's desires for specific services from people they trust, cultural needs, identities that they may hold, roles that they may be emerging into, such as maybe being expectant or parenting young people. And one key strategy that Rashonda mentioned is really leveraging family self-sufficiency programs that housing authorities operate, or similar programs that, and there's some additional kind of guidance that you can dive into further that really, for quite a few of the young people receiving FUP or FYI, create opportunities to extend the assistance beyond 36 months all the way to up to 60 months of assistance. And if you think about young people that have been in care, maybe they are in extended foster care and some independent transitional living settings through maybe age 21, then you pair that with, for those who need it, with a voucher assistance and services, you can really think then about an additional 60 months of support and assistance for young people throughout their emerging adulthood season of life. And the guides that we provided, a link to on the youth housing vouchers, go a little bit deeper and provide some additional links and resources. As far as the funding for this is concerned, housing vouchers, such as PUP and FYI, include a rental subsidy that's provided to a landlord by the Public Housing Authority. The youth enters a lease for an approved housing unit. The Housing Authority calculates portion of rent that's to be paid on behalf of the young person based on their income, household size, and composition. But the Housing Authority receives the funding for the rental assistance from HUD through both competitive and now also non-competitive mechanisms. So most of the awards over the many decades of this that Rashonda went through have been made primarily through competitive notices of funding that have come out from HUD, with the most recent, I believe, being this past spring. And this funding is contingent upon congressional appropriations of new funds in the federal budget. The FYI, a portion of the FYI awards for these housing vouchers for FUP eligible youth include a newer option of non-competitive awards where eligible housing authorities with their child welfare partners can follow some specific steps to request a voucher on demand or on a rolling basis as specific eligible young people are identified and confirmed as eligible. And so that creates a whole new opportunity, not just for those that received a set number of awards historically, but really creates new opportunities either for those that have used all of their existing allocations or those that haven't historically received competitive allocations of FUP or FYI vouchers to be able to really serve young people and ideally to try to support their transition from care and prevent experiences of homelessness, but also for those that exited and ended up without stable housing. It creates opportunities for those young people to be supported as well. And so this newer option, really there's some details that are on the websites, but it really creates opportunities, and there's some process steps, and an MOU or letter of intents have to be in place between the Child Welfare Agency and the Housing Authority that operates the Section 8 or Housing Choice Voucher Program. And I would also say that HUD has issued a number of additional trainings and frequently asked questions and information about the requirements in each one of their more recent notices of funding, as well as on the web pages that really get to some of the latest requirements and definitions that apply to FUP and FYI programs. There have also been recent changes in federal laws that both created and kind of enhanced and amended these mechanisms for accessing these critical vouchers, extending opportunities for this extension of up to 60 months, the family self-sufficiency pieces. And so again, highly encourage those that have existing programs as well as those that are exploring this to dive deeper into these requirements. With that, let's just look at a few common myths that we certainly at CSH hear from the field. So first, we often hear that from child welfare agencies or housing authorities that they think that every single family and youth that might be FUP eligible for a FUP or FYI voucher has to be sent over to referred to the Public Housing Authority at the moment that they're identified, even if there aren't any available vouchers. And the reality is that as an available housing voucher becomes available, the Housing Authority actually has 30 days to refer using their prioritization and referral process a family or youth for that opening. And when vouchers are fully utilized and then a voucher turns over or there's a new voucher coming down, it can be really helpful to actually refer those that are eligible at the time that vouchers are available to avoid young people kind of languishing on a waiting list, or by the time the voucher becomes available, the timing of being able to have the full impact or eligibility is kind of out of whack, and that can delay truly the impact and results that we're all seeking in service of these young people or the families. But it's really recommended that the Housing Authority and Child Welfare Agency have regular communication through identified liaisons, clear processes in place to alert of anticipated openings, and think about the roles of other partners such as the homeless response system partners, the continuum of care, other community-based agencies that really can help identify eligible youth and that might fit the eligibility. And I think the second myth, for young people that are still in foster care, the actual formal referral to a voucher can't begin until 90 days of foster care exit. But I think the myth is that that's when the housing referral process starts. There's preparation that can happen prior to that. So thinking of before 90 days, child welfare agencies can really support young people in gathering documentation, concurrent planning for maybe other strategies of permanency or other possible housing pathways, but concurrently, in case they might need a voucher, really be getting the right things in place. And so that at that 90-day mark, when a referral can be made, the young person's ready to go so that they can begin the process of getting a voucher issued so that hopefully there isn't a housing gap after foster care. And then the last myth that we'll highlight today is for the FUP or FYI households that include minor children. So thinking about young people that are parenting, for some of them, they may become involved with child welfare as parents themselves, either before or during. If it's beforehand, they may actually be more appropriate for a FUP family voucher if one is available. But if they're receiving assistance on a FUP youth or FYI voucher, when their children are placed in foster care, there's often a myth that the housing authority can put strict requirements about how long it takes before a reunification of the children takes place. And the reality is that the housing authority shouldn't set specific arbitrary time limits and really should lean into their partner at child welfare to confirm that reunification remains a child welfare case goal. And there's federal law that makes clear that the temporary absence of a child from the home due to placement in foster care isn't to be considered when determining kind of the family composition size and such. So just wanted to highlight those as a few myths. We can certainly dive into those further. There's more information in the briefs. But I think with that, let's actually now move to New Jersey and hear from them a little bit about their journey with federal housing vouchers for youth and kind of some of their partnerships and work to date. So I'll turn it over now to Luther Owens with New Jersey Department of Children and Families Office of Housing. Luther?
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Luther Owens. I work at the New Jersey Department of Children and Families. I'll start off by saying that we are a statewide public child welfare agency. We oversee child protection services in all 21 counties in New Jersey and approximately 46 local offices, in addition to several administrative offices. In New Jersey, we're the state's designated family servicing agency, focused on and committed to assisting and empowering residents to be safe, healthy, and connected. We do that through an array of programs and services that incorporate racial equity, family voice, and a protective factors framework. In this next slide, I will go into a little detail about the specific office that I work in. It's called the Office of Housing. The Office of Housing was created or launched in 2021 with the goal of centralizing the child welfare system's response to family and youth housing. Our vision is to improve the social and well-being outcomes of individuals, youth, and families involved with DCF by leveraging housing as a springboard. As you can see here, our office has three primary focuses. The first is program implementation, where we use an implementation science framework and teaming approach to onboard all of our new housing initiatives. Our second focus is systems advocacy and integration. And that includes working with other housing-related partners, both nationally, statewide, and locally. They include housing authorities, COCs, national organizations such as CSH and the National Alliance, as well as service providers in our community. The last focus of our office is really capacity building. And that's just really building the knowledge base of our child protection staff and our service providers as it relates to housing resources and options for young adults and families. This slide here is just a portfolio of the services we have within our office. Overall, we serve about 1,200 youth and families annually through housing. For family housing, we have a Keeping Families Together, or KFT initiative. For youth, we have an array of housing options that include shelters, transitional housing, and supportive housing. We also initiate a FSS initiative or demonstration project in one of our counties. And so just wanted to give a shout out and salute to our folks in Ocean County with the Lakewood Housing Authority if they are on this call today. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit, though, about FYI, or the Foster Youth to Independence Initiative, and how we found that to be helpful here in New Jersey. So in New Jersey, we really believe in using data to inform the work that we do. And so when FYI was first announced, we really looked at a graph similar to what you're seeing here. We tried to look at all the young people who were in that aging out population. And in New Jersey, that's young people 18 to 21. So we looked at all the young people who were in an out-of-home placement or open with us with a voluntary services agreement. And what we saw, as you can see here in the numbers, right, that most of our counties had 40 or less young people who were still involved with our system and aging out. And we thought, man, FYI would be perfect for that, because even in a non-competitive application, you can house up to 50 young people. And so it made that really appealing for us. And in this next slide, I'll go over kind of a timeline and some of the steps that we took to go after FYI vouchers. Right. Before I go over that, I really want to say in New Jersey, housing is very fragmented, right? The partners that we have. I said that we have, just with CP&P or child protection, we have over 46 local offices. In New Jersey, we have 16 continuum of cares. We have over 98 housing authorities and over 1,000 service providers. So when we thought about this work, really trying to figure out who to approach and how to tackle it was a difficult challenge for us. And so in this next slide, which is our timeline that I just referred to, I can kind of walk through what we did, right? So back in 2020, we put out a public notice to all housing authorities that might be interested in doing this work, and invited anyone who was interested to come. So we opened it up to any housing authority in New Jersey who were administering housing choice vouchers. That was around the end of 2020. In early 2021, we launched the Office of Housing. And soon after, we began circling back to all of those housing authorities that said they were interested. We started having conversations, exploring their ability to bring COCs to the table, because we thought that was important, and also their ability to be in touch with service providers. As a statewide child welfare system, we were going to put funding towards this initiative to help with things like applications and security deposits, but we didn't have the money across 21 counties or 98 housing authorities to support all service provisions. So we relied on folks to bring some of that to the table where they could. I'm happy to report that in 2022, we were awarded for 2 of those initiatives, and want to give a great thank you to any of our Newark Housing Authority and Camden Housing Authority folks who may be on the call today. They were our 2 beginning partners that got the award and have really kind of been in the mud with us doing the work. In 2022, we started to really look at data and pull some data on what we were seeing in the program early on. And this year, we were able to put forth 2 new applications, one which was recently awarded in Union County with our Elizabeth Housing Authority, so happy to report that. And we have several other applications in. One other that we hear is about to be awarded. So we're in the process now of looking at a phase 2 of this approach for us, where we really want to roll out or implement a couple new initiatives. We want to really strengthen our implementation of this program with supports and training, and really refine and continue to improve our practice. So in the next slide, we highlight who some of our key partners are. I mentioned the Newark Housing Authority and Camden Housing Authority. You can see their logos here on the left-hand side. Our partners include public housing authorities, continuum of cares, some community partners, service providers, private property owners who are very important in this work in terms of finding units, and of course, state, county, and local government agencies, constantly working with them to let them know what we're doing in this initiative and make sure that we're combining resources. Our focus areas include identifying funding, which is a difficult task, working in teaming structures to make sure that we're productive and holding each other responsible, sharing data, making sure that our policy and practice align with each other, and then training and technical assistance to make sure that we're continuing to strengthen the work that we do. This graph here displays some of the data that we're collecting and really just showing how we've grown over time in the number of youth that we're working with. And so as you can see here across those 2 interventions, we went from serving about 20 young people in October of last year to 40 now. We fully expect that number to double over the next 6 months. Through this initiative in the 2 counties that we're operating in, we have about 20 young people actually living in apartments and about another 20 currently in the apartment search process or voucher application process. I can't speak enough to what Andrew highlighted earlier about services and supports. Having knowledgeable, dedicated service providers that work with these young people is extremely important, from the voucher application process through the lease up, and definitely after they move into their apartments to ensure that they are aligned or have options for services that are going to promote well-being and stability. This next slide here, we just wanted to highlight some of the things that we see are working in New Jersey, and then what we see as needs for improvement. We think recognizing that FYI can get communities closer to function 0, which is ending homelessness, is very important. Again, in New Jersey, we have over 21 counties, and when we look across that spectrum at youth aging out in every county, the numbers aren't that high. We do want to recognize that this does not include young people who may be out in the community experiencing homelessness, and we try to partner with our COCs to help identify those young people. It also doesn't include those young people who are often identified in our annual point in time counts, who may no longer be involved in the child welfare system and experiencing homelessness. We think that leading with data works, making informed decisions, and being very strategic about resources like this and how we use them. We also want to put out there that FYI has to be part of a broader approach, right? You can't depend on FYI alone to stop homelessness in your community. You really have to look at other housing resources and make sure that we're going after those as well. And then we said partnering with targeted stakeholders. We're really prioritizing folks with knowledge of adolescent development to fully understand that young adult population that we work with, and folks who have experience in housing and housing young people and navigating housing and dealing with landlords and helping you sustain housing once they get in. All of those things are important, and making sure that the agencies we work with have the capacity to do that work. Where improvements are needed, we believe that funding for services is really important. You know, as Andrew highlighted earlier, there's funding for the vouchers, but there's no new funding for services and case management. And that's probably the most important piece here. Just having a voucher alone will not do it for young people. It's a very tight housing market, and that's fully exaggerated for young people. Inconsistent practice. At DCF, we really try to have a teaming approach, knowing that we are going to implement this project in multiple counties where folks may operate differently, right? So we try to bring all those folks together in a teaming structure and really have a standard of practice that we use across the state. And then the last piece that I'd highlight here is the housing market. New Jersey is one of the most expensive housing markets in the country, and that shows its face when we're out here trying to get leased up with young people. And so making sure we're prepared for that, making sure that we're tapping into the expertise, again, of folks who do this every day, whether that be realtors or housing finders or property managers, those things are important as well. In terms of what's next for New Jersey, we're looking to continue to partner with other housing authorities and continuum of cares who are able and willing to do this work. I think Malik highlighted earlier, looking at the percentages of housing authorities versus FY initiatives in New Jersey. We have over 98 housing authorities, right? We only have about 5 or 6 partners right now trying to do this initiative. So if you're on here and you're from New Jersey, we'd love to talk to you. If you're from other states and you're interested in doing this work, we'd love to share our ups and downs, our highlights and struggles, and work with you to put this work in your community as well. We're going to be focused on data collection and partnering with young people to kind of share their stories for this intervention, because we believe their voice is most vital in what we do. We're focused on program implementation and technical support, constantly improving the work that we're doing, and integrating with the broader community to leverage housing supports. So that's us in New Jersey. Our mission always is to make sure that our youth and families are safe, healthy, and connected, and happy to have an opportunity today to share the information we did with you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Luther. Just really exciting to hear about the journey. I'm going to invite you to actually stay on, if you don't mind, and I'm going to invite Malik and Rashonda back as well. And we want to have now a little bit of a discussion together. And certainly encourage, if you all have questions, to pose them in the Q&A function in Zoom for those who are watching live. But yeah, we want to maybe start by asking some questions. Rashonda and I are going to kind of pose some questions, and then we will open up for the opportunity to elevate some audience questions that were posed in the Q&A section in Zoom. And certainly encourages, we might pose a question to one of you in particular, but encourage any of the 4 of us to weigh in. And also for those of you watching live, you may have additional resources or ideas or contributions related to these questions based on your own experiences or work. And we really encourage you to share those thoughts, ideas, resources, or experiences to kind of enrich the conversation by doing so in the chat. So with that, Rashonda, do you want to kick us off with our panel discussion?
Yeah, would love to. And so again, Malik, Luther, thank you both for joining us today. We know that this work is incredibly important, and it takes all of us to play a role in making sure that our young folks are stable, are housed, and have housing stability. And so, Luther, you shared several partners in your presentation that are involved in doing this work, and that goes beyond, what the requirement of a PHA and a public child welfare agency. Can you share how your partnership has evolved over time?
Yeah, certainly. I think, right, we started off soliciting the help of housing authorities to do this work, looking at the required service array. I think, we recognize that adolescents need more. And so we really tried to invite other knowing partners to the table, knowing that COCs knew their communities well, really trying to identify service providers with experience doing this work. And I think we've also used those folks to help us kind of further design the implementation and figure out what the needs are of young people, and then work together to really make sure that we were providing those needs. And so I think, it started off as hey, here's what the application says you need, right? And through our teaming structure, we're having very pointed and strategic conversations about youth needs, and then constantly building on that to improve what we were doing daily. And that's a continuance for us, right?
Appreciate that. Thank you, Luther. And Malik, I would love to hear from you about what are some of those important partnership roles, like during your data you shared about, youth experience in homelessness specifically, and being able to hear information from you to receive survey responses. And so as you think about partnerships and roles that are important to identifying and to address youth homelessness, what do you feel some of those partnerships and roles are?
Yeah, so on top of, public housing agencies, child welfare agencies, the homeless service providers, I think it's important to also partner with mental health services and identity supports, especially for LGBTQIA plus two-spirited youth. Those services are like especially needed. Partnering with education departments to ensure access to ongoing learning, mentorship services, and most importantly, I think that we have to ask the youth themselves who they think is important to bring to the table and who they think is important to partner with, because again, as we all know, they are the experts. They know what's best for them and what works for them. So I think that we need to take the power back into their hands.
Yeah. And Rashonda, I'd also, add to that. I think like in New Jersey, we have like youth advisory boards that we, everything we do related to this work, we run through them. Everything from, right, like identifying youth to getting feedback from them. I'd also say, for us, trying to get to the table wherever we believe the partners are and really champion the work and tell the story. So whether that's, local monthly meetings that COCs and PHAs attend, or taking opportunities to speak at conferences to really highlight the work. I think partnering with our state housing authority and a lot of the initiatives that they're doing, really just trying to be active and get this word out to as much people as possible, I think is also really important.
Appreciate that, Luther. And can you share more about the youth advisory boards? Like, how did that come together and how do you keep the young folks engaged?
Yeah, so in New Jersey, our child welfare system has an office called the Office of Family Voice, and that's where our youth advisory boards sit. We have many young people who have been on those boards and now work for the department, and those young people often champion new policy for the department, give feedback, they identify candidates, and they participate in interview panels for new employees for the department. So they're very much a part of what we do every day here in New Jersey. And so it's almost required for what we do to make sure that those young people are included. And oftentimes when they step into a room, it's like a light bulb goes off for us, right? We spend months and months talking about things, and we never think about some of the things that they come to the table with. So they're a valued addition to our work. And so very happy to have them. And they're active all across New Jersey. And so it's a good thing for us.
Such
I
a
appreciate that.
critical point, Luther, too. I think, we see all across the country where young people and their voices, needs, and experiences are centered, where, there's that true partnership and kind of moving beyond just thinking about maybe a more narrow focus group, which can be important, or, an advisory board, and kind of stopping there, really thinking beyond and really creating those pathways and opportunities for young people with lived experience and expertise, in staff roles, like who's delivering the services, who's leading, right? What are the pathways to higher levels of leadership roles in nonprofits, in the child welfare agency, in the homelessness response system, and housing agencies, et cetera, right? And kind of thinking about the whole continuum of opportunities to really clear those pathways. So I think that cannot be emphasized enough in really thinking about I think especially too around the service delivery piece, like who might be delivering the services and where and how can those opportunities for people that are, that have been on similar paths and had similar experiences to be in more and more of those roles. Should we move to the next question, maybe? All right. So I know Malik, the National Alliance, obviously is as a national organization, is also a leading voice on federal policy related to homelessness. Could you share a little bit about kind of how you see or the why behind the policy work being important? And is there one thing, for those of us on this webinar that we might do in the different seats that we sit in that would help support or move forward policy related to young people and really trying to end homelessness?
Yeah. So I think policy work is so essential to addressing homelessness itself. Policies obviously serve as like the framework for systemic and organized efforts to really tackle the root causes of homelessness and provide some effective solutions. So I think all of us on this call, we have a voice, and that voice is so powerful. And if we use those voices collectively, we can continue to raise awareness about youth homelessness and really advocate for policies that address its root causes and also speak against the ones that can cause harm to so many. So.
Really appreciate that. Luther, I know having worked within and across, kind of partnered with a lot of different child welfare agencies over the years. I know child welfare workers are typically not experts in housing. And I've also worked at the Housing Authority and know that typically housing agency staff are often not experts on child welfare. Have there been challenges that this has presented for youth navigating the systems, or how have your partners kind of managed around this, or have you seen some progress?
Yeah, I talked earlier about like having teaming structures, right, and kind of using implementation science to do that. And so at DCF and our initiatives, we'll have an operations team, which is compiled of right the service providers. That will include a liaison from the child protection system, as well as representatives from the Housing Authority in our office. We'll meet bi-weekly or monthly to discuss the initiative and every youth in detail. In addition, we'll have an advisory team that may consist of a smaller group of some of those similar organizations. And we're educating each other about the work from our different seats. We're developing things like to implement the work, like referral forms and tools for case management and planning. But at the outset of this work, what we do is wherever we're targeting the work, we'll take our partners and we'll have what we call like a kickoff meeting. We'll go into the local office and we'll educate the workers about the new initiative. We'll talk about why it's important, how it stacks up against the other options they may have for housing and placement for the young adults in their areas. And then that way we try to really bring them together. We often find, though, that we have to do some reinforcements, right? Because our workers are so busy. Often they're getting told to go to a meeting and they don't know why they're there. So we find ourselves trying to find opportunities to come back into some of their staff meetings and having opportunities for Q&As. But we do have a liaison from each of those local offices that is in our meetings and translating the information back to that child protection staff.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's kind of a structure that we've seen others kind of utilize, but also I think, there are definitely jurisdictions that haven't put that kind of a structure in place. And so that kind of I think that can really serve as a platform. Rashonda, do you think, is there another question we want to pose, or before we move to the next part of this?
Yeah, I did want to circle back to what Luther shared about engaging private landlords. And, with this webinar, we really want folks to be able to walk away with something that they feel they can do to take steps towards, reshaping their FUP or FYI program, or, accessing these vouchers. And so would you be able to speak more to what that has looked like when you talked about, engaging private landlords? I mean, I'm thinking about, when I went to rent my first apartment and all the information that was requested. And so can you share how you all have gone about that process of engaging with private landlords and how that has had an impact on your utilization of these vouchers?
Yeah, I think in New Jersey, we've learned some lessons over the past, I would say 5-6 years, right? We partnered with our state housing authority. The first time we ever got some vouchers, we were just excited, and went out there and learned that we're social workers and have no clue how to navigate that world of dealing with landlords. And so we started to realize that, the folks in the community, service providers who've been doing this work for years know best. And I think where we've had our most success is really where we've leaned on our service providers, because they have relationships with property managers who deal with a host of landlords who trust them, and are willing to give them a shot, if not our young people, right? And so when you have those advocates in place, I think it makes an enormous difference. So I would say to anyone on this call, engage and trust your service providers who are knowledgeable about this work. I'd also say if you have property management companies in your communities, engage them around this work as well, and really sell them on this work. I think there's often a stigma of this population that they're like troubled young people, and I like to highlight that, in New Jersey, we have hundreds of youth in college who come to our foster care system that needs housing, right? So sometimes these young people are doing the same thing some of your own sons and daughter are doing, right? And so really championing this work in that way. I would say never send a young person out here on their own to engage a landlord. Even if a service provider or case manager or adult isn't knowledgeable about housing, they still are experienced in communicating with other adults. There often are, a go-between for the young person and the landlord, and an assurance if things go wrong that they're going to be there to help out. And I think that's extremely important. And I think where we have that occurring, we have a lot of success. When we don't, we struggle to lease up.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, has that supported kind of, I know often young people may have some challenging backgrounds or, kind of face some barriers related to not only some of the, landlord, tenant, or kind of housing search pieces, but kind of within that, some hurdles or barriers could be backgrounds related to criminal records or background checks or identity theft that occurred or different things. So just, has that been something that's been helpful in leaning on those partners? Are there any other kind of key strategies as those things come up that you've employed?
I think it's been extremely helpful when partners are involved. Yeah, because again, landlords tend to be more willing to take a chance when there's adult there, and that adult service provider has a contract, has access to funding and resources if something goes wrong. Because a lot of time the landlord's concern is that something's going to go wrong, windows going to get broken, property's going to get damaged, right? And knowing that someone's going to be there to help with that, and then also knowing just because someone had a difficult past, right, doesn't mean they don't have the ability to do better in the near future. And having that guarantee that, hey, we're working with this young person, they're currently working on those things that you saw in their criminal record, and they haven't had an incident in the last 2 years, right? Those types of things are really important to have service providers or advocates at the table when talking and dealing with landlords.
I think, Rashonda, what do you think? Should we move to some audience?
Yeah,
Question.
and I do want to
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Malik.
Go ahead, Malik.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in while we're still on this topic of building those partnerships and relationships with landlords. I think that child welfare agencies can also leverage the relationships and expertise that already exists within the homelessness service sector to house youth receiving the FYI voucher as well. So I just wanted to note that.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, so I'm excited that many of you have shared some questions in the Q&A function and are putting things into the chat. Keep it coming. Leah, what do you want to lift up for us that we might tackle as a panel?
Yeah, okay, so 2 buckets as of right now, then we'll see where we are with time. So the first one to kind of go along with your conversation around landlords, if folks could speak to what is it like, how to kind of entice or encourage the housing authority to come into these partnerships. Maybe they're not aware of the vouchers, or for whatever reason have said, hey, I don't want to do that. How might you bring them in and bring them into a partnership with you as a service provider, child welfare agency? So that's the first one. And I didn't know if maybe Andrew, or I don't know. Yeah, if Andrew maybe would want to kick us off, because I know you've worked for a housing authority, and then maybe Luther too, or Rashonda or Malik, thinking about your own experiences.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. So I'm happy to just say a few words, but certainly want to leave space for others. I think there's some very valid and real challenges in engaging, right? First of all, systems often don't have the deep expertise or understanding of the different mandates, the different roles, the different kind of constraints and considerations. And from a housing agency standpoint or housing authority standpoint, going after these new resources, while there's typically a desire to bring more resources in, there's also a need for those resources to be fully utilized. Utilization rates of FUP or FYI can impact the larger housing choice voucher utilization rates, which impacts, oftentimes the ability to apply for other resources. There are other potential consequences from a funding and kind of overall strategy standpoint. I think too, I would say that also like if the supports and services are in place, like really that's something I think to emphasize the partnerships and services, because there may be a concern with ramping up, more programming specifically for young adults that might, if it results in landlords having a bad experience with the overall housing authority, housing choice voucher programs, there's certainly not a desire by housing authorities to lose potential landlords, based on some experiences. And so I think really being able to elevate those partnerships, the relationships, the supports that are in place around this can be really critical. And also, as vouchers come in, the funding model for housing authorities for their administrative fees that they get to help administer vouchers, there can be a real opportunity there to bring in, and be able to leverage those resources. But I do think that cross-training piece and really thinking about and understanding and listening for some of the pain points and needs and mandates of the housing authority and really being able to speak to those, honestly, are critical points. But certainly any of the rest of the three of you may have ideas or thoughts.
Andrew, I would just acknowledge that I think we found that it is a really difficult and challenging task can be for housing authorities. There doesn't always feel like a lot of incentive for them, but there feels like a lot of risk. I think we have found, though, some very passionate housing authorities who really care about this work and are really willing to take on this challenge. I think a lot of the pitches that we try to make are through our COCs, right? Because there is some incentive for them, right? In terms of it helps them get more data, helps them understand their population better, often can help give them points towards things like the Youth Homeless Demonstration Project, and try to ask them to help be advocates to our housing authorities, because often they have closer relationships with them than we do, because we don't work with them as often. But I think can be very challenging for housing authorities.
Something I would like to add is just thinking about how we accurately capture the amount of young people that are experiencing or at risk for homelessness. And being able to bring that, to the housing authority's attention. I would love Luther and Malik as well, if like you can share, because oftentimes we do rely on the COCs to be able to, let us know what that data is, who are those youth that are currently experiencing homelessness. And so I'm interested to know what have been some other access points for youth, or to identify youth who might be experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness outside of the COC.
So I would say for us, right, COC data is often important, in that a lot of time they have access to point in time data. But for us, we're also able to speak to just all of our youth that I shared earlier, right? All those youth who are 18 and 21 who are still open with the child welfare system. If they're open at that age, that means they didn't achieve stability. And that means they're at risk for becoming homelessness, right? Like they're at risk for entering that population. So we're often able to share that data with folks and come to the table and tell a story of like, look, this is how many youth that we project, right, to need housing into adulthood as they exit our system. And try to combine that with the data they have to get a realistic look at what we need to do to house them. And oftentimes, I think that's helpful. That's an incentive, right? It kind of gives them an idea of, wow, if it's 30 youth and I go to an initiative like this, I can have a great impact in this community. I think that can be appealing for both COCs and housing authorities. So we try to share that internal child welfare data where we can. A lot of that data for us is publicly accessible. And so we try to point folks to that so they can constantly be aware of it. But yeah, we share the data, the internal data that we have.
Yeah, and I think the theme of what you both are saying is like research and evidence, and showcasing that. I think that the National Alliance in Homelessness really set their eyes on highlighting this data and doing some of the research, because like Luther said, it tells a story, and it really shows us that we need to ramp up our responses to youth exiting foster care, or youth who had involvement with the foster care system, and experienced or are experiencing homelessness at this moment. So I think it's important to continue to educate people and show them the numbers and the severity of the issue.
Yeah, I would just add one last point, or Rashonda, you may have, but I was going to add a point of, I think for leaders of child welfare or housing agencies or even continuance of care, oftentimes folks don't want to feel like they're putting themselves at risk and kind of being first to market, right? Or kind of first out in the field. So being able to share examples from other jurisdictions that have actually been able to find some success in these partnerships and in serving these young people and connecting the dots to kind of what is being proposed. And even, we'll talk towards the end too about some things that we have planned, but being able to invite them in to maybe collaborative conversations. I know CSH and Case Family Programs, are working on some upcoming opportunities that create some of those spaces, right? And I know the Alliance creates some of those spaces too that brings different partners together. And so those would be some thoughts that I would have. I don't know, Rashonda, were you going to make another point on this?
Yeah, I think my last point was wearing my urban planner hat. We do a lot of projecting in urban planning, from transportation to economic development and to housing. And so just thinking about the power that we would have, or Malik, interested to know your thoughts on what it would look like, or the impact it may have if we were able to project into the future. And so when we can, see the number of kids that are coming into foster care currently, and the data has shown us that the options for, being adopted drop drastically once a child comes into care and they have reached 9 or older. And so that kind of gives us a projection of what we might be looking at, of how many youth in our communities are at risk for aging out. And so Malik, any thoughts on just like what it would look like to project some of this data and who that might be of interest to?
I think that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in order to move from a reactive state. So looking at the data and saying like, oh, these are things that have been happening over the last few years, to a to making sure we're in front of the curve and trying to think through, okay, if we have these numbers, if we see these increases over X amount of years, what are we missing? What are we not looking at? And who are we not bringing to the table, so that we can have a different perspective of how to address this, to look at this data and use it to change the way that we're trying to provide support and encourage PHAs and child welfare agencies to like utilize up their utilization of FYI vouchers.
Excellent
Appreciate
point.
that.
And always, I would say always, where possible, and moving in the direction of partnering with young people in all of that, right? In talking with housing authorities, understanding the data, all of that. So I think, Leah, is there another, I know you all have been kind of grouping some of the questions that are coming in by theme. Is there another question or theme that you want to lift up from the Q&A?
Yeah, if maybe just kind of a quick overview related to funding for the services that, either maybe Luther, examples of how New Jersey is funding some of those services, if there's certain pots of money, and then two, if there's any conversation about the larger movement to get more service dollars specifically to tie with these types of vouchers.
Yeah, I think in New Jersey, right, we saw this as an opportunity to tackle young adult homelessness across all 21 of our counties. And so I think initially very creative, trying to ensure that we had a small, we didn't know how many folks or responses we were going to get. So really trying to ensure that we had a small amount of money to assist with things like security deposits, rental applications, and furniture, and really use some of our funding we had creatively, some of our wraparound funding, other little small parts of funding to do that, and really trying to leverage resources that may be in the community through the COC and the Housing Authority. What we did find in New Jersey is that, I said this is a difficult job for housing authorities, and again, shout out to any of our folks from Camden and Newark if they're on, but where we struggle with like service provision and case management, we had to go back and appeal to our leadership to say, hey, you know what, we need some funding. We need more funding to support case management, right? To support these services because they're so important. I'm championing the need from the federal government for more services funding because we know it's not sustainable across all of our counties if they all were to participate. So to answer your question, we were able to dip into some pots of funding to the child welfare system, but I certainly don't think that there's enough to do the work that needs to be done across New Jersey to have a severe dip in youth homelessness.
Malik, anything to add to
that? Leah, do you mind saying the question again? I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, go ahead, Leah.
Well, is there other work going on around service funding that we can bring into this housing world that folks might be interested in learning about?
Yeah, so I can't answer that question because I don't have too much information on that. But I can talk to a few people and we can figure out some things.
Yeah, I would just add too to this point, the youth housing voucher briefs that have been linked, that came out today, go into some examples of some funding sources. I would also highlight every jurisdiction has a little, everything is not exactly the same, right? As far as state and local budgets and kind of what's been, what's being fully utilized, where there's flexibility, political will, those kinds of things. But I think there's some great examples to really draw from. The briefs that the National Alliance put out for homeless service providers have, some information and ideas as well as some of the things that we put in the chat. And then we are also going to be issuing another short paper that case studies, gives some case studies of a few jurisdictions, both for thinking about families impacted by child welfare as well as youth, and some complementary state policy actions related to policy and funding actions related that are complementary, right, to kind of help fill some gaps. And I believe next year too, we'll be trying to lift up even more around some of the other, diving a little deeper into some of the other opportunities. But it's a really great, it's a really great question bucket and important. I think as we're wrapping up this, as we're wrapping up the discussion panel and nearing the end of the webinar, is there kind of a final one tip you would want to leave the child welfare organizations, housing authorities, or their partners with in really being able to take advantage of this opportunity to really access and utilize these federal housing vouchers for youth?
I think I would just say, like, give yourself grace as you're going through this work, as you're thinking through your implementation, how you're going to build partnerships, how you're going to, get more funding. Give yourself grace, because we don't know all the answers. We're learning as we're going along. And again, just make sure that you're checking in and bringing the youth along with you as you're going through this process.
Yeah. Malik, I agree with you 100% in saying give yourself grace. I'd also say give your partners grace, right? And be understanding of the challenges that they have in trying to do this work. I'd also say, where you can, lead with data. Make sure you understand the population that you're trying to serve, bring data to the table. And finally, just, having values and culture around what you're trying to do as a team when you come together, I think is so important. And I think we lead with those things, right? We can do a lot of successful good for young people who are experiencing homelessness.
Great, thank you. Shonda?
Appreciate that. Yeah, no, I think that you all are doing the work. It's going to take all of us, and we know that we're headed in the right direction because we have these resources available. And so my hope is that you will continue to stay connected with other folks on this call. And again, we'll talk more about how to continue to build up this supportive, collaborative space. But as we close out our time together, we invite you to answer one question, and you can share this in the chat. But what is one thing you plan or contemplate doing after participating in today's webinar convening?
And this would be for everybody who's joined us today. Feel free
Yes.
to share. And then Chris, I think we can invite you back. And thank you, Malik and Luther, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
yeah,
Chris.
Is it my turn?
Yep.
Thank you, everyone, for today. I just wanted to leave you with this. As states look at the needs of children and families, housing is an important component for stability of the family. We know that some states in Congress are looking at ways to address homelessness, and we hope that this webinar has been helpful to address some of the issues. And Casey Family Programs is committed to being a partner with jurisdictions to meet the well-being needs for children, families, and communities. So we encourage you to take this learning into your work and to continue to work in partnerships. So I'm going to turn it back to Andrew.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate your partnership and again, all the partners today. And just want to reiterate, so there's such an important opportunity that we all have right now to really greatly reduce youth homelessness and really support young people as they exit, utilizing these important resources. The recording and resources will be shared with everyone who registered within a week. And there are a number of resources at the One Roof Child Welfare and Housing Resource Hub, on HUD's websites, and on CSH, Casey Family Program, and the National Alliance to End Homelessness websites. As I mentioned earlier, later this month, we do plan to release a complimentary paper with some state examples of actions that align federal housing vouchers for young people and families. And then again, as you see in the chat, please complete the survey that we posted in the chat to let us know what other needs that you have for future opportunities. And it's a great way to share your interest in further exploration for opportunities for potential support from CSH, KC Family Programs, and our partners. And we are launching a peer learning collaborative in 2024, and we're planning 6 kind of topical peer sessions for those who express interest. That'll start in February 2024, really with some of the themes and questions that you all put in the survey and that kind of came out of the chat and the Q&A, both during the family webinar session that we previously held, as well as today's session focused on young people. So I think with that, we're really thankful that you joined us. Hope you walk away with concrete strategies with new ideas. You can also email us at oneroof@csh.org with anything else. And Rashonda, any final thoughts from you?
Just thank you. Thank you again for doing this hard work, but we also know this is hard work, and our young folks are counting on us. So appreciate you being here with us today, and we look forward to supporting you.